All right, we only have 2 chapters left. It's getting good. Tuck Everlasting. It is midnight. Winnie has promised to sneak out and go take May's place in the jail so they can escape. Let's find out what happens. Chapter 24. Leaving the house was so easy that Winnie felt faintly shocked. She had left. She had half expected that the instant she put a foot on the stairs, they would leap from their beds and surround her with accusations. But no one stirred. And she was struck by the realization that if she chose, she could slip out night after night without their knowing. The thought made her feel more guilty than ever that she should once more take advantage of their trust. But tonight, this was one last time she had to. There was no other way. She opened the door and slipped out into the heavy August night. Leaving the cottage was like leaving something real and moving into her dream. Her body felt weightless, and she seemed to float down the path to the gate. Jesse was there waiting. Neither of them spoke. He took her hand and they ran together lightly down the road, past other sleeping cottages, into the dim and empty center of the village. The big glass windows here were lidded eyes that didn't care, that barely saw them, barely gave them back reflections. The blacksmith's shop, the mill, the church, the stores, so busy and alive in daylight, were hunched, deserted now, dark piles and shapes without a purpose or a meaning. And then ahead, Winnie saw the jailhouse, its new wood still unpainted. Lamplight spilled through a window at the front, and there in the clearing yard behind it, like a great L upside down, was the gallows. The sky flashed white, but this time it wasn't heat lightning. For a few moments later, in a low rumble, still far away, announced at last the coming storm. A fresh breeze lifted Winnie's hair, and from somewhere in the village, behind them, a dog barked. 2 shadows detached themselves from the gloom as Winnie and Jesse came up. Tuck pulled her to him and hugged her hard, and Miles squeezed her hand. No one said a word. Then the 4 of them crept to the back of the building. Here, too high for Winnie to see into, was a barred window through which, from the room in the front, light glowed faintly. Winnie peered up at it, at the blackness of the bars with the dim gold of the light between. In her head came to the lines from an old poem. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage. Over and over the lines repeated themselves in her head till they were altogether meaningless. Another roll of thunder sounded. The storm was moving nearer. Then Miles was standing on a box. He was pouring oil around the frame of the window. A swirl of wind brought the thick, rich smell of it down to Winnie's nostrils. Tuck handed up a tool, and Miles began to pry at the nails securing the window frame. Miles knew carpentering. Miles could do the job. Winnie shivered and held tight to Jesse's hand. 1 nail was free. Another. Tuck reached up to receive them as they came out one by one. A 4th nail screeched as it was pried up, and Miles poured on more oil. Oh, that's what the oil was for. I wasn't sure why they were using oil, so it's so that the nails come out quietly. I got it. Sometimes when I get stuck, I have to keep reading, and if I still don't know, I go back and reread. From the front of the jailhouse, the constable yawned noisily and began to whistle. The whistling came nearer. Miles dropped down. They heard the constable's footsteps coming up to May's cell. The barred door clanked, then the footsteps receded and the whistling grew fainter. An inner door shut and the lamp glow disappeared. So what do you think we can assume was happening? They heard the rattle of the door. I'm guessing he was checking the door. The whistling grew fainter and went away, and then the light went out. What do we think the constable or the jailkeeper's done? I have to read between the lines. It's not telling me. I'm thinking he's gone into the other room or gone to bed. At once Miles was up again and prying at the nails. An 8th was out, a 9th, a 10th. Winnie counted carefully, while behind her counting, her mind sang, "Stone walls do not a prison make." Miles handed down the prying tool. He grasped the bars of the window firmly, ready to pull, and stood poised. What is he waiting for? Thought Winnie. Why doesn't he? Then a flash of lightning, and soon after a crack of thunder. In the midst of the noise, Miles gave a mighty heave, but the window did not budge. The thunder ebbed. Winnie's heart sank. What if it was all impossible? What if the window would never come out? What if... She looked over her shoulder at the dark shape of the gallows and shuddered. Again a flash of lightning, and this time a crashing burst of noise from the swirling skies. Miles yanked. The window frame sprang free, and still grasping it by the bars, he tumbled backward off the box. The job was done. 2 arms appeared in the hole left by the missing frame. May. Her head appeared. It was too dark to see her face. The window, what if it was too small for her to squeeze through? What if, but by now her shoulders were out. She groaned softly. Another flash of lightning lit her face up for an instant, and Winnie saw an expression there of deep concentration, tip of tongue protruding, brows furrowed. Now Tuck was on the box, helping her, giving her his own shoulders to pull on. Miles and Jessie close at his sides, arms upstretched, eager to receive her bulk. Her hips were free. Now look, here she came, her skirts tearing on the rough edges of the boards, arms flailing, and they were all in a heap on the ground. Another crash of thunder muffled Jessie's bursting, exultant laugh. May was free. Winnie clasped her trembling hands thankfully, and then the first drop of rain plopped precisely on the tip of her nose. The Tucks untangled themselves and turned to her. One by one, as the rain began, they drew her to them and kissed her. One by one, she kissed them back. Was it rain on May's face, on Tuck's, or was it tears? Jessie was last. He put his arms around her and hugged her tight and whispered the single word, remember. Do you know what he's wanting her to remember, right? Then Miles was on the box again, lifting her. Her hands grasped the edge of the window. This time she waited with him. When the thunder came, it tore the sky apart with its roar, and as it came, she pulled herself through and dropped to the cot inside unharmed. She looked up at the open square and saw the frame with Miles's hands holding it. The next obliging roll of thunder saw it wedged once more into place. And then, would Miles put the nails back? She waited. Rain came in sheets now, riding the wind, flung crosswise through the night. Lightning crackled, a brilliant, jagged streak, and thunder rattled the little building. The tension in the parched earth eased and vanished when he felt it go. The muscles of her stomach loosened, and all at once she was exhausted. Still she waited. Would Miles put back the nails? At last, standing on tiptoe on the cot, she grasped the bars of the window, pulling herself up till she could see just through. Rain blew into her face, but at the next flash of lightning, looking down, she saw that the yard was empty. And before the thunder followed, in a pause while wind and rain held it back for one brief moment, she thought she heard, fading in the distance, the tinkling little melody of the music box. The Tucks, her darling Tucks, were gone. Let's keep going. 25. The first week of August was long over, and now, though autumn was still some weeks away, there was a feeling that the year had begun its downward arc, that the wheel was turning again, slowly now, but soon to go faster, turning once more in its changeless sweep of change. Winnie, standing at the fence in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, wait a minute. So, here's something that authors do sometimes. They jump from time to time. They're not telling us about what happened when Winnie was discovered in the cell. They've jumped ahead into time to the end of summer. I'm not sure if the author's going to go back and tell us. I'm hoping, but that's something you can do in your writing. Jump ahead, skipping over some things, and then maybe revisit it in a flashback. Let's see how the author does that. Winnie was standing at the fence in front of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, could hear the new note in the voice of the birds. Whole clouds of them lifted, chattering into the sky above the wood, and then settled, only to lift again. Across the road, goldenrod was coming into bloom, and an early drying milkweed had opened its rough pod, exposing a host of downy headed seeds. As she watched, one of these detached itself into a sudden breeze and sailed sedately off, while others leaned from the pod as if to observe its departure. Winnie dropped down cross-legged on the grass. 2 weeks had gone by since the night of the storm, the night of May Tuck's escape, and May had not been found. There was no trace of her at all, or of Tuck, or Miles, or Jessie. Winnie was profoundly grateful for that, but she was also profoundly tired. It had been a trying 2 weeks. For the 100th time she reviewed it all. How the constable had come into the cell soon after she had settled herself on the cot. How he had let down a shutter over the window to keep out the rain. How then he had stood over her as she hunched under the blanket, her breath heavy, trying to look as large as possible. How finally he had gone away and not come back till morning. But she had not dared to sleep, for fear she would kick off the blanket and give herself away. giving the tucks away unwittingly. So she had lain there, pulse-thudding, eyes wide open. She would never forget the rattle of the rain on the jailhouse roof, or the smell of the wet wood, or the darkness that had saved them all, or how difficult it was not to cough. She had wanted to cough as soon as it occurred to her that she mustn't, and she passed a long hour trying to swallow away the tickle that perversely constricted her throat. And she would never forget the crash outside that made her heart race, that she could not investigate and did not understand till morning, when on the way home she saw that the gallows had blown over in the wind. Oh, it made her tremble still to remember the constable's face when he found her. She had heard first a bustling in the front of the jail and smelled fresh coffee, had sat up stiff with apprehension. Then the inner door opened, the door she now saw which separated the office from the pair of cells, and in the light that streamed before him, the constable appeared carrying a breakfast tray. He was whistling cheerfully. He came up to the barred door of her cell and looked in, and his whistling died on his lips as if it had run down and needed to be wound up again. But this comical astonishment lasted for a moment only, and then his face flushed red with anger. Winnie had sat on the cot, eyes downcast, feeling very small and very like a criminal. In fact, he was soon shouting that if she were older, he'd have to keep her there, that it was a crime what she had done. She was an accomplice. She had helped a murderer escape. She was, in fact, a criminal, but too young to be punished by the law. Worse luck, he told her, for she badly needed punishing. She was released then into the custody of her mother and father, and these new words, accomplice and custody, chilled her blood. Over and over they asked her, shocked at first and then wistful. Why had she done such a thing? Why? She was their daughter. They had trusted her. They had tried to bring her up properly with a true sense of right and wrong. They did not understand. And finally she had sobbed the only truth there was into her mother's shoulder, the only explanation. The Tucks were her friends. She had done it because, in spite of everything, she loved them. This of all the things her family understood, and afterwards they drew together staunchly around her. It was hard for them in the village. Winnie knew it was, and the knowledge gave her pain. For they were proud, and she had shamed them. Still, this side of the affair was not without its benefits, at least for Winnie. Though she was confined to the yard indefinitely and could go nowhere, not even with her mother or grandmother, the other children wandered by to look at her, to talk to her through the fence. They were impressed by what she'd done. She was a figure of romance to them now, where before she had been too neat, too prissy almost, somehow too clean to be a real friend. Winnie sighed and plucked at the grass around her ankles, and soon school would open. It wouldn't be so bad. In fact, she thought, as her spirits lifted, this year it might be rather nice. And then 2 things happened. First of all, the toad appeared out of the weeds on her side of the road this time. It bounced out of a cover of old dandelion leaves and landed plop just beyond the fence. If she had reached her hand through the bars, she could have touched it. And next, a large brown dog with easy gait and dangling tongue came lopping down the road toward them. He stopped opposite the fence and looked at Winnie with a friendly swish of his tail, and then he saw the toad. At once he began to bark, his eyes bright. He pranced up, his hindquarters leaping independently from side to side, nose close to the toad, his voice shrill with enthusiasm. "Don't!" cried Winnie, leaping to her feet and flapping her arms. "Go away, dog! Stop that! Go away! Shoo!" The dog paused. He looked up at Winnie's frantic dancing, and then he looked at the toad, who was pressed down close to the dirt, eyes tight shut. It was too much for him. He began to bark again and reached out a long paw. "Oh!" cried Winnie. Don't do that! Leave my toad alone!" And before she had time to realize what she was doing, she bent, reached through the bars, and snatched up the toad, and away from harm, dropping it on the grass inside the fence. A feeling of revulsion swept through her. While the dog whined, pawing uselessly at the fence, she stood rigid, staring at the toad, wiping her hand again and again on the skirt of her dress. Then she remembered the actual feel of the toad, and the revulsion passed. She knelt and touched the skin of its back. It was rough and soft both at once, and cool. Winnie stood up and looked at the dog. He was waiting outside the fence, his head on one side, peering at her longingly. "It's my toad," Winnie told him, "so you better leave it alone." And then, on an impulse, she turned and ran into the cottage, up to her room, to the bureau drawer where she had hidden Jessie's bottle, the bottle of water from the spring. What's she going to do with the bottle? Is she going to drink it? In a moment, she was back again. The toad still squatted where she had dropped it. The dog still waited at the fence. When he pulled out the cork from the mouth of the bottle and kneeling, she poured the precious water very slowly and carefully over the toad. The dog watched this operation, and then, yawning, he was suddenly bored. He turned and lopped away, back down the road to the village. When he picked up the toad and held it for a long time without the least disgust in the palm of her hand, it sat calmly blinking and the water glistening on its back. The little bottle was empty now. It lay on the grass at Winnie's feet. But if all of it was true, there was more water in the wood. There was plenty more, just in case. When she was 17, if she should decide there was more water in the wood. Winnie smiled. Then she stooped and put her hand through the fence and set the toad free. "There," she said, "you're safe forever." So much to think about and write about. We're going to finish the epilogue, which is kind of like an ending or wrapping it up tomorrow. Can't wait to finish the book. Get out your journal and write down a jot or two.